What's up, guys? I know some of you guys might be wondering where I've been the last few months. It has been 2 or 3 months since my last upload, but basically I've just been hustling. I've been grinding super hard, working on my business, wrenching on cars nonstop. In that time span, I've managed to save up some money and get some really cool parts together for the S14, and I'm ready to pull that thing in and start working on it again. So today we're gonna be working on the fuel system. I've got some really cool parts for this thing. I've got a lot of name brand, high quality stuff. I'm sort of bringing the fuel system into the more modern age. Right now I'm running side feeds and like a flash computer and a bunch of kind of old school stuff, really. So I'm gonna be converting it over to top feed injectors with a new style fuel rail. And we've got a new fuel pressure regulator as well and a bunch of other supporting mods for this. We're gonna be going over some cool stuff today in this video. Everything from making AN lines to setting up this fuel system and doing a little bit of wiring as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring the 240 in, and we're gonna start unboxing some parts and taking a look at what we have today. So let's check it out. I've been spending so much time the last few months wrenching on other people's cars. I just can't express how excited I am to finally get back to work on my car. So before we start tearing into the new stuff and I start showing you all the new stuff I got, I want to quickly go over kind of the old setup that I have. So this is a factory fuel rail. It uses side feed style injectors. I do have some 5.0 1000cc injectors in there. This car is set up and tuned for E85, and this setup works fairly well. Now, it was a while ago when I went through all this, and as you can see, I kind of powder coated the fuel rails, and I used some hardware, and it's sort of rusted out since then. And honestly, the fuel rail I was stoked on it back then, but I'm not too happy with the way it looks these days. You know, I also sold my fuel pressure regulator setup to a customer. So right now it's just a factory fuel pressure regulator. You know, you can also see I'm just using rubber hoses here and a Z32 fuel filter. So I'm also running like a ZMAF and a flashed ECU. It's on the floorboard in there. So this is all like cool stuff and it works great, but I'm looking to go over all this and really get everything modernized and running on new technology. So with that being said, I'm gonna show you guys what parts I ended up getting for this car. All right, guys, as you can see, we got a radium box here. So we got some really high quality stuff. Before I wanna get started, I wanna give a shout out to Jack's Performance Fittings. I got all my fuel system components from them. If you guys are local to Jacksonville, go check out Jack's Performance Fittings. They share a facility with Jack's Fab Shop, so they're really, really good guys. They know what they're doing. They can get you set up with the right components, and it's also just a good excuse to go check out an awesome facility and chat with some guys that are leaders in the industry around here. So let's go ahead and pop this thing open and take a look at the star of the show. One of the coolest parts of what I got here. So we've got a nice radium top mount, or top feed fuel rail, I should say. So this is a really cool piece, and it's really going to finish up the cold side of my engine bay. I do have some plans in the future for the hot side, kind of modernizing that as well. But this is a great place to start and get me ready for a good tune on a standalone computer. We also have, since we're going to a top feed fuel rail, we need the top feed injectors. And we have these Injector Dynamics ID 1050s. And these have the clips and the pins, so it should be a pretty easy job to wire all this in. But man, I am excited to try these Injector Dynamics injectors. They're top of the line, some of the best you can get. So this is going to treat me really well as I go for my standalone and start retuning everything and start making more power down the road eventually. With the fuel rail, we also have these kind of seats here. These go into the intake manifold and give us something to set the top feed injectors into. So that's kind of goes along with the fuel rail. And we've also got a couple cool stickers here and the mounts for the rail as well. I've also got some fresh zinc coated hardware to kind of help clean everything up. Now this is something that I'm really excited about. This is a radium fuel pressure regulator. It's kind of like a new-ish design. The guys over at Jack's Fab Shop have been using this on a lot of their builds, and I'm really excited to give this a try. So basically, this thing, instead of having like a fuel pressure regulator connected somewhere to your firewall or strut tower, this thing connects directly to the fuel rail. So it really cleans up the bay a lot, and it's got really easy adjustability, and it's compact, and yeah, it just looks really nice in the bay. And again, it's just about bringing this car into the modern age with like new designs, new technology. Radium has been doing some really cool stuff, so I'm excited to give this a try and see how that goes. We also have a fuel filter. So this is a I forget which micron it is, but it is set up for ethanol and it's serviceable, so I can replace these filters. And again, all these fittings, hoses, lines, and even like all the radium stuff I got through Jack's Performance Fittings, so definitely go give them a shout. And this is a ethanol content sensor. So essentially what this does is it tells you the content of the ethanol in the fuel, so the percentage of ethanol. So like, let's say E85, even though it's labeled as such, isn't always 85% ethanol. This will tell the computer for sure what the ethanol percentage is, and that allows me to do things like variable maps, where I can either run it on pump gas, which I honestly never will because pump gas and SR20s don't really agree with each other, but it allows me to kind of dial in the tune depending on the amount of ethanol I have. So I also have some AN fuel line here, and remember, it's important to use quality stuff. When it comes to your fuel lines, your AN lines, you know, the fuel line and the fittings, it's really important to use high quality stuff, because if you use the cheap eBay stuff, you know, this will break down and it will leak. Same thing with these fittings will leak, especially if they're near heat, and you don't want to lose your entire build because you cheaped out on filters, lines, fittings. Everything you see here is from Racetronix, and it's really good quality stuff. So yeah, that's a good general idea of the components and everything that we have. I guess all we can do now is just start tearing into the car and getting it all apart and getting ready to fit up all the new stuff. All right, so I got the old fuel rail pulled off. Super easy, super quick. I still have to wire in the pigtails, but I'm gonna go ahead and start by installing the new fuel rails. So here's the old fuel rail removed. Pretty easy stuff, came out pretty quickly. Next, we're gonna move on to installing the fuel rail itself. Installing these components first gives you a good idea of where everything is gonna land, so you can start making up your lines. In order to install this fuel rail, we gotta install these seats into the intake manifold. This basically allows you to adapt the port on the intake manifold for the top feed injector. I've already got one installed over here, so I'm gonna go ahead and press in the rest of these, and that'll allow me to throw in my injectors and then throw in the fuel rail. So the radium seats are in, and they look pretty sweet. One thing I forgot to mention, these do have O-rings, so you want to make sure that those O-rings don't pinch or bind or do anything weird on the way in. So it's pretty important to lubricate them. Now, you don't just want to use any lubricant. Don't use like a WD-40 or like engine oil or ATF or anything like that. That stuff can really expand and mess with the rubber. I like to use a silicone lubricant. There's also this stuff called Super Lube that ships with some O-ring kits, and that stuff is really good as well. So same thing with the injectors. I don't want the O-rings doing anything weird, so I'm just gonna put a dab of silicone on it, and that'll be good to go. So I'm gonna go ahead and press in these injectors, and then I'll mount on the fuel rail, and yeah. Okay, so at this stage, I went ahead and got the fuel rail completely assembled and mounted up. I like to kind of start by mounting up the fuel rail and building off from there. It gives me a good idea of where to run the lines, how everything is going to connect, and it's just good to build off of the fuel rail. So as you can see, the fuel rail is mounted up, all the injectors are in place, and I went ahead and already made one AN line. So basically this is my return line coming off the fuel pressure regulator, going into the Link ethanol content sensor. So what this sensor does is it allows for the ECU to read the ethanol content in the fuel. And this will give me the ability to do what's called flex fuel tuning. So I'm mainly gonna be running E85 out of this car, but even still, it allows me to really dial in the map depending on the ethanol percentage that I happen to be running at any given time. Another link sensor that I installed is this fuel pressure sensor. So again, it's just giving the computer more data for, you know, better tuning basically. So one cool thing about this radium fuel rail is their new design of the FPR. So this is a really sweet design. Usually your FPR is separate from your fuel rail, mounted somewhere on the firewall. Things can get bulky, there's lines running everywhere. This really reduces a lot of clutter and helps clean up the bay. And it's also on these swivel fittings, so it's kind of hard to see because it's already installed, but everything can be moved on the fly here, which makes setup and installation really, really easy. And man, does it look sweet. I also went ahead and grabbed a fuel pressure gauge rather. This is a Marshall one. I think it looks pretty cool. So there was a lot of different options on how to run my lines. Now I could have done a 180 fitting here and ran the line along the rail here and then down. I decided to just go with a 90, and what's gonna end up happening is I'm gonna run this down and along the frame rail. So as you can see, it's really a mess down here. This happens very often on S14s. There's wires, there's hoses, there's AC lines. I'm gonna take this as an opportunity to try to clean this up as much as possible while I'm working in here. There's a few other things that I wanna clean up as well. These power wires, I'm gonna get new lugs and just sort of clean them up and make them look a little bit better. And yeah, I'm gonna be cleaning up a lot of this wiring. Because I'm gonna be making some new wiring for these two sensors and a few other sensors, I'm gonna try to like route everything in a more streamlined way and really clean things up. But yeah, for now, we're gonna continue on the fuel lines. So essentially what this line is gonna do is it's gonna come down and it's gonna run along the side of the frame rail to the fuel filter. So I went ahead and mocked up the fuel filter. You can't really see it down there, but we're gonna get underneath there in a minute and I'll show you guys exactly what's going on underneath the car. Moving along underneath the car, you can see exactly where I am thinking the inline fuel filter is gonna end up going. So it's really hard to find a place for this thing. It's really big. I didn't want it too close to the ground where it could potentially scrape. I didn't want it in the engine bay because it's just way too bulky. Yeah, I'm kind of thinking this is the best place for it. Now, as you can see, it's an absolute mess down here. There's just wires and hoses going everywhere. Like I said, I'm taking this as an opportunity to go ahead and try to clean up this section of the engine bay. It's something I really rushed through and I should have taken more time with it. And you know, now I'm kind of having to take care of it. So as I deal with my fuel system, I'm gonna be trying to sort out this wiring. You can see I have a lot of stuff unplugged and hanging here. So I'm gonna be finding a better way to try to route all this. So you can see that these are my two fuel lines. This is my return and this is my feed. Usually these lines run all the way over to here and you can see that I cut them back. So I cut them back, I put some flares on them, and Racetronix has this really cool fitting that allows you to convert a hard line over to AN. You can even use these on barb fittings, on top hats, on your fuel system, on top of your fuel tank. And I went ahead and threw a barb here, and this return is just a standard, basically fuel hose setup that goes to the ethanol content sensor up there. So basically what I need to do now is make a short AN line, and I'm gonna be going through real quickly and showing you guys how I make my AN lines, some do's and don'ts, and some tech tips basically. So the first thing you wanna do is go ahead and figure out the length of the line you wanna make. I went ahead and marked mine here, and I like to put a little bit of tape on here, and that kind of prevents it from fraying. Now, if you have the right tool for this, it's like a big pair of bolt cutters, it looks like. That does a really nice clean cut. Unfortunately, I don't have that, so the next best thing is cutting it with a cutoff wheel. And this tends to make a really nice clean cut, but it's not perfect. So the tape really helps with keeping down on the frayed edges. So pull on the line a bit, and I do my best to try to make a straight cut right in the middle. And there we go. So this tool is really nice. It basically has magnets and it's all aluminum, anodized aluminum, just like the fittings. And essentially it's just a jig for your vise, and it allows you to really secure these AN fittings and work with them without marring them because they are aluminum. and you know, the anodized coating can scratch off pretty easily. So, okay, so the first thing we wanna do is prepare our fitting to go on the line. So essentially what you do is you pull off this piece here, and now we need to get the line inside this fitting. What I like to do is put a little bit of silicone lube. You know, as usual, don't use any oil-based lube like WD-40 or anything like that. I like to get it in my vise. Nice and secure. And then I go ahead and press in. So you want to make sure that this is pressed all the way in. And you can check by looking on this side. And it's kind of hard to see on camera, but you basically want to see the line butt up against the threads inside here. So the next step is to essentially thread this fitting into the hose. Now, some things that I have seen happen, you know, these two pieces are aluminum. These threads are very fine and they're fairly strong, but what can happen is this thing can have a hard time going in, and one of two things will happen. The threads will start to cross thread and bind up, or the hose will start to push out. You don't want either one of these things to happen. So you kind of want to lubricate the end of this barb, and you want to keep these threads protected. Some people use grease for this. I personally will just use a little bit of aluminum anti-seize, and this kind of helps the threads go in smoothly and kind of lubricates the top. And I just use a very small amount. That's all it takes. So we're gonna get this started. And then we're gonna get it in our jig. Now, something else to consider is they do sell aluminum wrenches, and that really goes a long way in protecting the fittings as well. I don't have that, so I'm just gonna use this adjustable wrench and just try to be very careful with it. Now, one thing you want to remember is while you're tightening this top one, don't accidentally run into the bottom one with a wrench, because you can mar it pretty badly. Also, these don't need to be like torqued down super tight. I've actually seen these heads shear right off the fitting before. Basically, about halfway down, it's actually tight enough to hold pressure. Of course, you want to go all the way down, but once these two surfaces made up, you really don't need to torque any further than that. So I usually go all the way down. I go until I don't see a gap anymore, and I let the two surfaces made up, and I like to make sure that the two flat surfaces are lined up as well. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and run this one in that anti-seize. Sometimes you'll see that the hose is spinning a little bit, and you know, it can help to kind of hold it in place. Get my wrench up. And yep, we're gonna run it all the way in until we don't see that gap anymore, being careful not to mar the fitting underneath. And just like that, the line is complete. So we're gonna go ahead and do the same thing on the other side and install it underneath the car. So here is that AN line finished and installed. Pretty easy stuff, honestly. So as you can see, I kind of went crazy and finished up a bunch of stuff. I spent a bunch of time working on wiring. I tidied up my transmission harness, and I tidied up a bunch of wiring up in the engine bay. It's kind of hard to tell from down here. I'll show you guys that in a minute. I also broke out the rivet nut tool and put some rivet nut inserts in, and really secured some of these lines and my power wire as well. One thing you guys may notice is that I actually have two power wires here. So what's actually going on here is, this is my old power wire, and it really just wasn't sufficient enough. I think it was two gauge, so I ended up going up a size, and instead of pulling out my old wire, I just left it in and used it as an auxiliary ground, basically tying the battery in to the front like engine. Basically, it just kind of ties everything together. It probably doesn't do much, but it can't hurt. So yeah, that kind of explains that. Another thing is that you can see my slave cylinder is super rusty, and I'm also missing the rubber hose that kind of is supposed to connect to this line. And I'm gonna go ahead and order a new slave cylinder, get that on the way, and get the hose and get that sorted out as well. Another thing you guys may have noticed is my like hacked up, haggard subframe. So this is a subframe relocation, and I did this probably 7 years ago before I even knew how to weld. I had my buddy weld it up for me, and yeah, so back then it was decent. These days it's not the best, and considering I have a full Part Shop Max Pro angle kit, it might be time to go ahead and get this done correctly. So there's a company that actually makes an aftermarket subframe, so I'm looking at that, and I may potentially end up going that route. Another thing is my power steering fluid is, my power steering rack is leaking like crazy. So I do have another rack. I'm considering sending that one out to get rebuilt and then swapping it with this one. Or I may just throw the other rack in. I'm considering my options here. So that's a few things underneath here that I was thinking about that really need to be addressed, and it's a good reminder to get under here and see all that. So another thing is, you may notice this rubber hose here. So basically I routed this to my evaporator core drain. I was afraid that like when I'm running my AC, it would be dripping water all over the fuel filter and just getting on the lines and corroding everything. So I ran this silicone hose up there, and it kind of directs the condensation down to the ground and not all over my fuel filter. All right, so back up top in the engine bay, and you guys can see I've pretty much finished up the fuel system up here. I went ahead and wired in the injectors and put some heat shrink on, so the new connectors are good. The injectors are all wired up, and I went ahead and finished this fuel line. So this was the last fuel line I needed sorted. And I talked about it a little bit before. I was considering which way I wanted to run everything, and this is what I decided on. So basically, this little clamp here helps keep it exactly where I want it. Now in the future, if I don't like this, I may go ahead and go for the 180 and run it along the fuel rail. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think. Does this look pretty good or what? That's one of the hard parts about building cars like this, is sometimes there's no real right way to do it. It's all just kind of personal preference, and you just gotta try what you can and hope it looks good and hope nobody bullies you on the internet, right? So yeah, we're pretty much finished up on the fuel system up here. I spent hours cleaning up the wiring, and there are still a few loose wires here, you can see. So basically what that's about is, as I wire in my sensors, I'm gonna be tying them all into that loom and zip tying them together and running them into the firewall. So there's still some wires that need to be ran, so I'm waiting to run those before finishing up everything, but it is much, much cleaner down here. It's kind of hard to tell on camera, but it was a lot of work, and yeah, it turned out way better. I cleaned up these connectors, I put on some new lugs, I cleaned up some of my grounds, you can see down there. The grounds are a little better, and yeah, this side of the engine bay is really shaping up and starting to look really good. And I am stoked to see our radium fuel rail installed, our injectors in, and we got some awesome sensors to wire up. And I still need to do the vacuum line for the fuel pressure regulator, but this is a good stopping point for right now. So we made some serious progress on the S14 today, guys, and I'm so stoked to have that radium fuel rail and all the goodies in. It's been a long time coming for me to get started on this stuff. Like I said, I've been super busy with customer cars, but I'm super excited to be wrenching on my S14 again. In the next video, we're gonna be installing a Link G4X Monsoon standalone computer. So we're gonna be doing a lot of wiring and going over the basics on that. This is new to me. This is something I haven't done before, but I have a feeling I'm gonna be able to figure it out pretty quickly. It should not be an issue at all. So yeah, be sure to subscribe, leave a comment, like. It really helps me out a lot. I'm looking forward to working on my car some more, and I'm really planning on getting back into YouTube and uploading a lot more as well. So yeah, stay tuned, guys. I'll see you in the next one.